Of this tape is Return to Lucifer Star. We're going to follow it up with another chapter where we will go both to the Bible and secular history, and we will entitle the chapter that will follow this one, The People of the Dog Star Sirius, which is supposed to be, they say, the brightest star in the heavens. I would imagine that would depend upon where you were viewing it from, because as we've said before, at different times when the so-called planet, or so-called sister planet, Venus, comes in close proximity to our planet, as we've said over and over, that the different nations say that it was even brighter than our sun, sometimes referred to as a sun because of its brightness. But we're going to find verification from both the primitive nations, the so-called heathen nations, where they talk about space travel and people who come from different parts of the galaxies. Now let us continue with this tape that I've entitled Return to Lucifer Star. No, my friends, we're not trying to use any type of cheap sensationalism to stir the listener. I can understand how you might have trouble accepting this chapter, as I would have been a doubting Thomas a few years ago, having read my share of nonsensical UFO books, who, now not all, but many of the authors, their only motivation was a fast buck, and are about as believable as Alice in Wonderland. They write them about little green men, blue, gray, and oriental-looking men, and sometimes they speak of beauties that would make you throw rocks at the Miss America contestants. But I believe Adamski, and there was one other man whose name fails me at this time, he spoke about these raven beauties that hailed from Venus and the Pleiades, who they claimed to have contact and personal connection with them. But I often wonder, when they write these things, why didn't they cite some of the evidence that I have given in the different tapes? So I believe that a lot of it was fanciful information. Now, turning for a moment from the UFOologists, who have many of them, not all of them, because I guess you would say I was a UFO buff, to say the least, but a lot of these that have head trips of nothing but erotic flights of fantasy, to the religious, who tell us of neutered angels with wings on their back that that fly down here from some great chicken coop in outer space. I must confess, while starting this research, and I had great intentions of writing a book, but I found that I was not a journalist, to say the least. And I realize that most men today, and women alike, we're so busy trying to make the almighty dollar, not in quest of filthy lucre for filthy lucre's sake, but so many honest, hard-working, salt-of-the-earth people out there, they're just trying to survive. And I have to confess that I'd gone through about 30 different chapters, or shall we say tapes, that I'd gone to a great deal of research and written down, but something didn't compute. And I never dreamed of the clues that I had right there in my own previous chapters that would open eyes to this understanding. Now, I ask you for your indulgence, and those of you who have been able to follow the clues up to now, we have to use some repetition for those who are not familiar with the Scripture, and because of the to say the least, the highly controversial subject matter, we feel that we have to use a certain amount of repetition in order to prove this, hopefully, what I hope will be a great revelation to you, as it was to me. The next drama that appears from outer space, I believe, will dwarf the rest of history and will cause them all to fade into obscurity. We may comprehend this little place in which we stand. We're speaking of the planet Earth now. This is not the sum total of the Creator's house without end. It's just His footstool, as we've cited before, which He steps down on occasionally. And then we find that we shall graduate, if we're to believe the Scriptures, from mortality and all things mortal are subject to graduate to where, and people talk about going to heaven. And how have we denied the answers until now? But wait until it's a popular issue. You might wait until Hades freezes over. Let's go back and visit those who appeared to have walked through doors into dimensions that we never dreamed existed. And I think by searching these out and understanding, we're going to have a preview of coming attractions. Yes, he still speaks in a wee, still, small voice that echoes through the quarters of centuries and down through eternity to those who may hear and understand the science and the technology in our end of this great hall of history. Let's interview some of these men and see what we missed and share the common denominator, if you would. Now, the men of old, they have indeed failed miserably if we're not fulfilling our destiny as we stand upon their shoulders and we learn from their writings and their examples. If we fail on this, not understanding their witness of the truth, which they devoted their lives. Now let's go to the first witness among many, Elijah. Where did he go? And where in heaven's name is he? A lot of people say they believe that, but when I ask them where did he go, they can't give me an answer. And I didn't have an answer for many years. But we have such a great array of witnesses who apparently they experienced and this great foreshadowing of events to come to ensue here, what? Possibly by the year 2000 or shortly thereafter. Their witness, I must confess, has been overlooked by myself and others for the last 2 millenniums. We've cited St. Paul, King David, Moses, John of Revelation, and Jeremy of the Apocrypha, Elijah, Enoch, Peter, and many others, and we've overlooked it. We shall see. Let's go back now and check and see what they were really trying to get across. And there's a saying which I've written down in the front of my Bible, and I've used it several times in order to try to get people to think. Tradition is the enemy of progress. Change is a departure from that which has failed us. Therefore, we must have the courage to investigate the unknown, for the known has failed us completely, or that which we thought we have known. But when you try to tell people this, they will fight you tooth and nail to the death for that little that they do know, not being willing nor subject to take on new subjects and information that might disturb their gray matter. Does it not appear that our religious ideas have failed us? All of our religious concepts, they can't seem to stop murder, rape, drugs, incest, abortion, and an endless list that we will save you from. So, do we need new pulpit pounders, or do we need some truth? As the Messiah himself said, the truth shall make you free. Now, as we go to the 14th chapter of Isaiah, it puzzled and has confounded man for close to, at least the last 2,000 years. I believe that the disciples that walked with the Messiah, surely that they were privy to know and to understand these things. Now, we've heard for many years these clowns that come up with the idea God is dead. And some of these would-be preachers who trying to cash in on the cheap publicity have come up with a new twist that there's no Satan and there's no devil. Now, if this is true, why argue about it? But as we've stated before, Satan simply means he who committed treason against the kingdom or the government of the Almighty in outer space, or if you want to use the religious term in heaven, fine. Now, devil is one who accuses the Almighty unjustly. We have seen in the Bible and books of every nation that's ever existed, they've had their share of Satans and devils, and it seems the government of this age have more than their share. Now, we've discussed the fact that there have been many what I call intergalactic Simon Legrees who've come from the stars, and they've interfered with the social order of men. As Genesis begins with space watchers traversing the racial streams of troubled mankind. Now, Genesis tells of extraterrestrial travelers that copulated with earthmen, and they caused some sort of genetical freaks that turned on society, something from a bad gene pool. The book of Jude confirms this, those who left their first estate from among the stars. And it goes on to say that they're to be locked in chains of darkness. Now this ancient race that was disposed to other planets and had taken through the darkness of outer space. Now, in researching the idiom's chains, we find it's another word for bands, and the question was asked in Scripture, who can loose the bands of Orion? Meaning, who has the knowledge or the ability to break loose from the power of gravity and fly to other planets? It seems that Job had several talks or meetings with these extraterrestrial space travelers, whom he referred to as gods. We find Job refers to Arcturus, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south, whatever that means. Was he referring to a place or planets, another solar system? We'll leave it to you, the listener, to ponder. Job 9 to 13, from the King James, starts out thus, which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south, which doeth great things, past finding out, yea, wonders without number. You will forgive me if I wonder about these things, and surely he wouldn't write them down if there wasn't an answer for us. Now verse 11, Lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passes on also, but I perceive him not. Now I believe that we will show as we get into more detail in other chapters, speaking of Job, that he was quite familiar with space travel, and as we give in other tapes, that it talks about that there was intergalactic communication between these planets, and they were referred to as the old idioms as sons and daughters and wives and so forth, showing that they were of the same type and the same species of a mankind. But yet old Job here, he saw some things that even with all of that scientific knowledge and space travel of his age, it blew his mind, so to speak. Behold, the 12th verse, he says, he taketh away. Who can hindereth him? In other words, who can stop him? Who will say unto him, what doest thou? Verse 13, if God will not withdraw his anger, the proud helpers do stoop under him. Now, helpers is one of another ancient term referring to like waves of the sea. But here we're talking about waves of those who travel up on the waves of the sea of space, just like we talked about the ancient Peruvians when they met Pizarro, and they referred to him as Viracocha, one of the ancient god-men who came to this planet. And the old priest wrote down that all they could understand by this, that it was some sort of waves of a sea. So again, we have another witness to this, and this symbology, these idioms, this etymology of the language apparently was carried over to many nations, most modern and primitive of that day and age. Now continue on in Job 38:31 to 37. Again, Job here, he expounds on outer space that could only have been learned because he had been in communication with some advanced space traveling extraterrestrial that had vast knowledge, who had learned by space travel with the possibility and the ability of reaching other solar systems. Verse 31, he starts out like this, canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Now I wish that I could go and take the time and break all of this down for you, word for word, and get into great detail, but let's just for the time, we'll skim over this lightly and try to follow it and consider these things. Verse 32, canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Verse 33, knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Verse 34, canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of water may cover thee? I believe here, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that clouds is talking about something that travels in the cloud. but the abundance of waters. It doesn't say rain, it says waters. It's speaking of peoples. It's speaking in the old idiom of racial streams. Verse 35, canst thou send lightning that they may go and say unto thee, here we are? Verse 36, who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given the understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can stay the bottles of heaven? So you see right here, listen carefully. Who can number the clouds in wisdom? In other words, my friends, let's stop and think that is utterly silly. Nobody can count clouds because they're moving so fast. There's so many of them, and sometimes they're connected into one big cloud. He's not speaking of clouds here. He's speaking of a type of a cloud ship. Now, those of you that have heard the genie in the bottle, you understand who can stay the bottles of heaven that he's talking about. Sometimes it refers to basins or bowls or cherubims or cherubs or sous or eagle ships. But the bottles here, in other words, can you give the command to them? No, it tells that the Almighty of his great extraterrestrial air force, he's the one who commands them. Now, we notice the sons of Arcturus, as he mentioned that, and it seems quite apparent that there seems to be habitable planets and people living in that region of space. It says so in verse 31. It tells of extraterrestrials who can land and break free from this gravitational pull of these planets. Verse 34, the translators thought that the prophet was given a weather report, so they assumed that the clouds were nothing more than rain clouds. As you've learned, the clouds here is an idiom of a ship that flies above the earth and throughout the universe. Water is an idiom that refers to other people. It didn't say water, it said waters. People in outer space, and that can protect you against earth and extraterrestrial foes, such as the example given in Psalms 148, verses 1 to 4. The religious world has read over this. They've ignored it. They've never stopped to consider what it is, but in the light of the examples that we're giving you, I believe that you can comprehend it. Praise ye the Lord. Praise ye the Lord from the heavens. Praise him in the heights. Praise ye him, all of his angels. Praise ye him, all of his hosts. In other words, without number, he has great hosts of people living out there. Praise ye him, sun and moon. Praise him, all ye stars of light. Praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that are above the heavens. In other words, people in space and way up and out there in other galaxies that we have never considered in our day and age, but I think some of the scientists are now considering this, and they know that all of these planets and stars and moons and suns, they weren't put in there because the Almighty was bored and had nothing else to do, but there's many habitable places. Christ said so, in the Father's house there are many mansions. How many is many? And why did he build them? He said he's going there to prepare a place for you. That's kind of a mind blower, to say the least. Now, verse 1 originally said, praise the one true God of Israel, Yahweh. Verse 2, praise from his messengers, space travelers, all of his hosts, referring to the inhabited worlds that seem to be without end. Verse 3, planets do not have voices to praise him with. The sun, it represents kings and rulers like David. Now, King David, he referred to the moon and the stars in a couple of verses there, but he didn't mention the sun because he represented the children of Israel. He was their allegorical son. He was their ruler. The sun was over the lesser rulers, represented by the moon. Now, the stars are pointed out how Job referred to the stars singing together and shouting for joy. Now, the races possibly that sprung from the garden and the sister planets. Remember that Satan was once referred to as an angel or a star of light, having been trusted with great truth. Now, verse 4 tells of the heavens of heavens. In other words, other solar systems. Then he speaks of waters or people or of races even above these heavens. You might look again to Job 38:37. Can you count the millions of spaceships? Note the word bottles, which is another word for smaller type ships. This is where primitive man, they started to corrupt the truth, and they started this genie in the bottle myth. Well, it wouldn't be a myth, but this was the only way they had to compare it, and we've already pointed this out in the genie in the bottle chapter. But once again, we want to point out why people cheat themselves out of all of this great knowledge, ignoring the Bible, because these would-be teachers and preachers, they've failed to learn the languages, the idioms, the allegories, and the parables of the Bible, fulfilling the scripture about the blind leading the blind, so that we both fall in the ditch, meaning that they're untutored as to the real meaning. The ditch that they fall into is other religions, or they become victims of soothsayers, palm readers, stargazers, and etc., and etc. Now, Matthew, he almost never uses the term kingdom of God, Yahweh. Rather, he uses the word the kingdom of heaven, or he's referring to outer space. Now, this was written by Moses from heaven and delivered in the mount ship that took him to the third heaven. Luke, on the other hand, he almost never speaks of the kingdom of God, Yahweh. The New Testament teaches, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Until now, no one has questioned, where in heaven is this place? You mean a planet or many planets? Until now, few, if any, have dared to question this. Religion has left its followers believing that they would go to some ethereal dimension in a mystic, ethereal spook form, remain a ghost for eternity. I know that here just recently I was shocked at one of the major denominations. I went to my daughter's house and they were trying to proselytize her to their particular religion. And she questioned this lady who was quite zealous. She meant well, but she was wrong. And so my daughter said, how did Christ leave? Will he come back? She said, no, he won't be back. He just dissipated into a cloud and ascended into heaven. When he comes back, it'll just be in spirit form. And my God, it kind of leaves you without any faith. Why would you want to be converted to that? Now, let's go back citing this God, whoever he was. Quoting the scriptures, he is a spirit, and he who worships him must worship him in spirit. But they skip over the Trinity that defines the Almighty as the Almighty being the Heavenly Father, which tells us he's body, soul, and spirit. And Genesis tells us, let us make man in our image, showing that there existed other sons who reproduced more sons for Earth. So we see more evidence of some of these intergalactic he-whores that came to Earth to interfere with the plans of the father of Adam and his descendants. We've shown that Satan is one who commits treason, and the devil, he's an accuser. In a moment we're going to clear up what Lucifer means here, the most misused, misunderstood name misused by all of the nations of this world at present time. Also, what and who caused the confusion. The irony of it all is that the one who was lauded by Christendom for over 4 centuries now, old King James, he plagiarized it from 3 other older editions. Yes, old King James is the main Bible that's used by the Protestants and mistakenly called a translation. He used the archaic English with all of the these and thous, which gives us a clue that it was not an original translation of his time, because the these and thous was no longer used in England in the language. It had disappeared 80 years before the printing of the King James Version. This shows us that they took it from other older Bibles and they changed these versions, or should we say perversions, to please old King James and his liberal church hierarchy. I don't care if people get mad at me for saying that. They didn't do their homework. So you don't have to be a Satan from outer space to become a devil. Here's an example of some Israelites who became devils, or accusers of the Almighty, or complainers who blamed the Almighty for taking them into the desert. people failed to get the parable. They were in the desert and they were led around for 40 years and they were kept out of the promised land. The Almighty didn't keep them out. It was theirs of their sin and their ways. They kept themselves out. And what amazes me and gives me mental indigestion, I think what a bunch of knotheads our progenitors were, when you see all these extraterrestrial ships and the Almighty coming down and taking Moses away and taking his brother Aaron up and bringing back these laws from space, and they were fed and they were watered by extraterrestrials all those years, and they still didn't change. Boy, something gets to me there. But anyway, now the 5th verse, and the people spake against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread. Gives us a clue as to the nutritious food that was brought by these, what I would call the flying bakeries. And so here they speak against God, making them devils, accusers of God. And in the 6th verse, and the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Now, as we've seen before, a fiery serpent cannot be a flesh and blood rattlesnake that crawls around on the ground playing with a Zippo lighter, unless we believe in fairy tales and magic dragons. And this is where so many people have stayed in the darkness and spoke of ignorant things like Eve talking to a snake and eating an apple off a magic tree, and it doesn't say anything about an apple in the Bible. But we go on perpetrating this hogwash because we haven't done our homework, and then we wonder why we can't get anybody intelligent in the neighborhood to go to church with us. Let's go to verse 7. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he may take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people. Verse 7 proves the point that they sinned. They fell short of the law. They admitted that they sinned against God, and they asked Moses to intercede and to remove the fiery serpents that punished them. Now Moses asked the Almighty to remove the smaller extraterrestrial ships, or we could believe he sent a bunch of angels with a garden hose chasing snakes all over the desert. Some picture we have to conjure up here, huh? Now, verse 8, and the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it on a pole, and it shall come to pass that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, he shall live. Now, my friends, I'm circumspect of this translation here. Well, later on we knew they would come to worship this. They made an idol out of it, but the translators have really bastardized the language here and left us in the dark. Verse 8 is unclear due to the translation. I think the subject changed here, as the word for bitten was nashak. It's a prime root. It means to strike with a sting. The idiom or meaning of the sting was the same as that is still being used by modern man, like I got stung on the deal or cheated. But as I said before, and I've known much greater scholars than I will ever be or profess to be, that they cited that this book of Genesis was not in a proper chronological order, so a lot of the old translators, they broke it all down. They shoved these different subjects together, thinking they were all talking about the same thing. Now, as we go to Strong's Concordance, he goes on to explain that sting is figuratively to oppress with interest on a loan, bite, lend upon usury. Now, my friends, in those days, usury was the death penalty, and it's still supposed to be. We still use the expression putting the bite on someone or borrowing money from a bank. If you do that, you're going to be stung by these high interest rates, and charging the brother interest in those days, I say, was the death penalty. Now the 9th verse, and Moses made a serpent of brass. He put it upon a pole. When it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, then he beheld a serpent of brass, he lived. Did it mean that he was released from the loan? Proving that the translators have messed it up and added to it. Here I'd like to quote to you from the Far-Fenton footnotes in the same chapter. And he was suspicious of him in those days. He has here note 4:11. This is upon the western side of Moab. And then he goes on, note 2. I think that the last clause of verse 13 and on to the end of verses 16 is an explanatory note of a copyist of a later time and not part of the diary of Moses, Farrar Fenton. Now, I believe that he's right, but you have to remember that Mr. Farrar Fenton, I don't believe if he did, he was a very old man and his translating days were over by the advent of the airplane. But his first Bible in its entirety came out, I believe it was in 1903. But he couldn't understand what these fiery serpents were, and so I think that if he were living today, he would definitely question this 9th verse and Moses the serpent of brass and so forth. That I do not deny that this happened, but I don't believe it belonged with the other subject. Enough said to this. Now, back to the masses who, for after 400 years, they were still confused and they did not understand the word Lucifer, which is used only once in King James and for the most part other translators. And now the 1560 and the 1600 edition of the Geneva Bible with its side notes, I've said footnotes at times, but they put them on the edge of the page. We're talking about the great men of the Reformation of that era that were fighting against the domination of the apostate church. Now, the side note says that they put in there were the last to really clear up the issue on what Lucifer meant. It was pointed out by my son-in-law, who had the footnotes of Isaiah 14, which is the only place this word Lucifer is used, and we've pointed out how the name was changed many other places by the translators. That has confused the reader for the last 4 centuries. Now, the hero of the Protestant world, supposedly, old King James, he outlawed the Geneva Bible because of its footnotes on the edge of the pages. He sent out a decree that anyone caught with one of these Bibles with the footnotes, he was to be burned at the stake. Now, the majority of the people cut off the footnotes or the side notes in order to avoid the death penalty. We are not slandering any denomination or people. We're just pointing out the facts of history. King James, he called the footnotes seditious. So they were burnt for sedition against old King James' government. Because you remember, he appointed himself as the head of the church and the head of the government. He got taxes, he got tithes, and he set himself up as God, and God's intermediate. Maybe the notes on sodomy was what offended him in his gay lifestyle, because we find that he had 46 different bedfellows. As per the book by entitled, James the First by Otto, I believe it was Otto J. Scott. The Geneva Bible is now back in print and is on the market. If you need one of them, write to us. The reader may write to me, and anyway, let's go back to the footnotes here. They were intact as people fled to the free religious nations such as Holland. It was called an open city. And then the Pilgrims, they brought this Geneva Bible to America. They would not have a King James Version. They called it a government issue. Just like these people today that go to the county and they go to the state and the federal government, say, well, we would like to operate a church and we promise not to offend anybody in the government. We won't do this and that if you'll only give us a tax-free status. Well, I no longer I'm interested in that, and I don't want one of them, and I don't go to the government to ask if what I preach is all right with them. I don't care if I offend them or the consequences. What I'm interested in is offending the Almighty. Now, we notice that the 14th chapter of Isaiah tells of this wicked king of Babylon. Now, some students of Scriptures are taught that this was the original Satan that was in the garden of God. But if they read the chapter carefully, they will note that even this Satan here, he had lost his immortality after being kicked out. He lost his chance to the tree of life. Now back to the wicked king who ruled over Babylon, which it appears that he governed the entire world. And unfortunately, up until recently, and all of this archaeological and historical evidence that's being shoved in our face, we can no longer deny that the world was such a small place. Because even in Proverbs, the 8th chapter, it talks about the habitable parts of the earth. Well, also we find that this great Babylonian king, he was ruling over the children of God, and they were captives of this great Babylonian empire, government as you would. Now verse 12 tells us that he came from outer space, and it's quite clear that the Greeks called him a fallen angel or a messenger, or at least the son of one. Let's see if we can see who this mysterious, powerful king was and where he came from. He was apparently shuttled here by a spacecraft, as were the people called Adam and the peoples of Eve, and also Cain, who was driven out of the garden to this earth, as we've covered, as we spoke of the cherub ships that guarded the entrance, that they might not return. Now, I'm going to quote you from Isaiah 14:11-17, and I think if a lot of you would like to go and read that carefully, you could find out how they ruled the nations all over the earth. You might find it really exciting to get yourself a good concordance and go break all of this down, as I have not taken the time to present it here to you. But it goes like this, the 11th verse. Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noises of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, the worm covers thee. Verse 12. Now this is where we have to read it very carefully. How art thou fallen from heaven, comma. He's talking to this king. How art you fallen from heaven? Then he says, where? He says, O Lucifer. Now, as we said before, Lucifer is the ancient name for Venus. Then he goes on, he talks to the man again after the comma, O Lucifer. He wasn't calling the man Lucifer. He was talking about the abode, the planet, Venus, the garden, Eden, the mount of the Almighty, the holy city, the heavenly Jerusalem, the bride of the Almighty. He shows where he was kicked out of. O Lucifer. Like we would say, the United States. Oh, the United States. But my friends, our glory's fading fast here. But anyway, then he goes on, he's addressing this king again. O son of the morning. Well, we know that Venus is the morning star. And he said he was a son of that morning star. Just like you say, you're an American. How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? Now, was this speaking of weakening or destroying nations and worlds and outer space? Or is this talking about after he got here, how he messed things up? Verse 13, For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars, or in other words, the planets of God. He said, I will set also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. In other words, a mount where a lot of people are congregated in the sides of the north. We'll deal with that in a moment. Verse 14, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Boy, what a vain, egotistical swine he was. Verse 15, Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Verse 16, They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, and did shake kingdoms? Verse 17, Thou that madest the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, and opened not the house of his prisoners. Now, they destroyed cities thereof. Now the Geneva Bible titles Isaiah 14 as the fall of the tyrant. I believe that this was definitely Cain or one of his kids. Now we will start with verse 11 and we will spell it out the old English way. He goes on to say, thy pomp, I won't pronounce all of the old archaic English way of doing it, is brought down to the grave, the sound of thy vials, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms over thee. Now the footnotes of this Geneva Bible, it says, instead of thy costly carpets and ring, C-O-U-E, rings. Here we have the description of the king being brought down to earth. Was he saying now that there, here on this earth, with Adam kind, you'll die like us? Were the footnotes, now this is mysterious, referring to costly carpets? As we have talked in, or spoken of in past tapes, where the ancient idiom that refers to flying carpets, genies in the bottle, were they expressions or allegories, like we'd say UFOs? Now just think, if somebody dug this up 1,000 years from now and would revert it back into the caveman expression, how would they know what we meant by a UFO? Or were they using the expression flying carpets? Next, what is a ring? Was this referring to the rings accompanying larger vessels or so-called carpet ships that Ezekiel spoke of, like wheels within wheels, or rings within rings? Verse 12 in this old Geneva, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, sonny of the morning, cut down to the grounds, which did cast loties upon the nations. It's so simple that the reason that we've been misled by this verse, we use the expression fallen from heaven. We should have said in modern days, would say flown here from outer space, when it describes from whereabouts in outer space. O Lucifer, then as if it's not clear, they say sonny of the morning. We have shown Lucifer meant bright star, morning star, evening star, all referring to Venus, as even most dictionaries have told us that. Note that he was called a son of that space station. Sounds very much like the one that the ancients called the half-god Cain, who was kicked out of the place described. So he would be called a son of, or from the morning star Lucifer, or a morning star. Yes, at one time you could say he was a Luciferian citizen, but just because you capture a rapist in New York or in Iowa or wherever, that doesn't mean all New Yorkers or all people from Iowa are no good. It's just talking about this one so-and-so. Now, to clear this up, Cain was the first Antichrist who killed his brother. But as we've stated before, this was talking about a people, a world who destroyed another world. But we will prove that later. But his first disobedience, when he was asked to repent of his sin, he was told to offer a blood sacrifice, which was symbolic of the, well, I may be getting into some heavy-duty stuff here, but it's talking about the people of Adam and of Eve and of his wife, who was impregnated with the offspring of Cain. And so I believe that their blood sacrifice was shown, that they were to show that they knew that they had defiled a special gene pool of the Almighty, and he didn't approve of it. But so we find Cain, he was disobedient. He offered vegetables. Now, if he had offered a blood sacrifice, he would have had to shown, as it says in the Hebrew, that he was a mamzer or a bastard, as the Hebrews, even today, they call the people who mixed with those outside of their nation. Note the old text in verse 12, it referred to the wicked king as a sonny, a babe, a little offspring. Later, he's referred to as a wicked branch of the tree. Adenius, and is speaking of Nebuchadnezzar. Now we find in this, it tells of Abedenius, or another wicked king who supposedly descended from one of the half gods. It's not quite clear here that he had help but it is quite clear, I'm trying to say, it shows that he had help from extraterrestrials. And they used the word possessed, which meant helped and directed in the ancient language. Abedenius, in his history of the Assyrians, he has preserved the following fragments of Megasthenes, who says that Nabuchodonosor, having become more powerful than Hercules, invaded Libya and Iberia, where he had rendered them tributary. He extended his conquests over the inhabitants of the shores upon the right of the sea. It is moreover related by the Chaldeans that he went up into his palace. He was possessed by some god. Now, we can't help but be suspect here. He went up into his palace. And he cried out and said, O Babylonians, I, Nebuchadnezzar, foretold unto you a calamity which must shortly come to pass, and neither Belus, see, like Baal, Cain, and we see here definitely this man is from the Canaanite families. Belus, my ancestor, nor his queen Beltis, had power to persuade the fates to turn away. A Persian mule shall come, and by the assistance of your gods shall impose upon you the yoke of slavery, the author of which shall be a Mede, the foolish pride of Assyria. Before we should thus betray my subjects, oh, that some sea or a whirlpool might receive him. In other words, he was talking about, he was hoping that a spaceship from out of the sea of space would come and take him away. And he goes on to say, and his memory be blotted out forever, that he might be cast out to wander in some desert where there are neither cities nor traces of men, a solitary exile among rocks and caverns where beasts and birds alone abide. But for me, before he shall have conceived these mischiefs in his mind, a happier end will be provided. So I think they failed to understand that he was talking about that he would be exiled on some desolate planet in outer space. But I may be stretching that, so I'll leave it alone. It goes on to say, when he had thus prophesied, he expired. He was succeeded by his son, Evil Malyorchuas, who was slain by his kinsman, Nariglasarius. And Nariglasarius left Labosarius his son, and he also had suffered death by violence, and they made Nabonidus king, being no relation to the royal family. And in his reign Cyrus took Babylon and granted him a principality in Carmania. Now, concerning the rebuilding of Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, he writes thus: It is said that from the beginning all things were water, called a sea, Thalatus. that Belus caused the state of things to cease, and anointed to each its proper place, and he surrounded Babylon with a wall, but in the process of time this wall disappeared, and Nebuchadnezzar walled it again, and remained so with its brazen gates. Now we've referred before, and Fenton says in his footnotes, they talked about even more ancient cities, that they were an old Nebuchadnezzar of ancient antiquity, that they a lot of scholars never dreamed even existed. But he goes on to say it remained so within the gates at the time of the Macedonian conquest. And after other things, he said Nebuchadnezzar, having succeeded to the kingdom, built the walls of Babylon and a triple circuit in 15 days. Isn't that odd? Now, how could he do that in 15 days? Did he have some sort of extraterrestrial help that was using, instead of levitation, they were lifting these stones into place with their ships? Who knows? Maybe I'm way off base. But he said he turned the river Armakala, a branch of the Euphrates, and the Arcanius, and above the city of Zephara, he dug a receptacle for the waters, whose perimeter was 40 parasangs, and whose depth was 20 cubits. And he placed gates at the entrance thereof, by opening which they irrigated the plains. And these walls they called, well, I'll skip that ancient name there, they meant sluices. And he constructed dikes against the interruption of the Etherean sea, and he built the city of Tridon against the incursions of the Arabs, and he adorned the palace with trees, calling them the Hanging Gardens, and so forth. Now, what is quite interesting, and we'll just touch lightly on it, is one of the great engineering feats of the world. And you go to, and you see the remnants and these pictures of the ancient Babylonian gates. It has pictures of flying lions and flying horses and other type of a strange creature that I'm not able to identify. It looks something like a llama that you find in Peru. And we find that when I was there, these Indians told me if you dig around, a lot of times one of their ancient rituals there, they would carry bury this stone effigy to the god they called the Mama Llama, and a lot of times you dig down below that Mama Llama, you'd find another Mama Llama. And so is this some rite left over, symbolic of the flying bulls and all? Was there extraterrestrial divine intervention that took place in this great scientific engineering feat that would even stagger and take the wealth? And, well, it would destroy the coffers of some of the third world nations of today. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world. But here we find this ancient Babylonian king there, that some say that was Nebuchadnezzar, one of his ancestors, that he bragged that he was going to go up above the clouds of heaven and even above God. And so it seems very likely that there was extraterrestrials working hand in glove with them. And I can't help but wonder about, it tells us in scriptures, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and darkness. And where are they? It said in high places. And I don't think it's talking about like in Washington, D.C. or in Russia. I think that a lot of these ancient governments, that they were assisted by some of these tyrannical wandering misfits of space. But there are many accounts of Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. Some we spoke of as encounters with watchers and so forth. Now you, the listener, you may want to go study in more depth. Isaiah 14 and 13, it puts the lid on it. Here we have the wicked king saying he's going back to take over. Verse 13, yet thou sayest in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven and exalt my throne above the starries of God. Now we're quoting from the 1600 edition of Geneva Bible. The starries of God. I will set also upon the mount of the congregation and the sides of the north. Remember, we pointed out that even Venus was referred to as a mount, and the wicked king here, he makes an issue that he's going to sit especially in the sides of the north. Now, if that puzzles you, and you say, well, where do you get this, the eastern star, the morning star? Now, Geneva's footnotes back then, they say that this north means Jerusalem. We go back to John of Revelations. He was told by an extraterrestrial messenger to write in the book of the Revelations 22:16 that Jesus was and is the bright and morning star. He's the head. That's his house. He's the head of it. And John was taken there. He called the space station that he went inside of. He said it was a new earth. It was a heavenly Jerusalem. Now, chapter 14 of Revelation said that John stood on the Mount Zion and he saw these 144,000 people. Revelations 14:1, Revelations 21:2, and I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, and on and on. Now, if we study the history of the many ancient civilizations that seem to suddenly appear with great scientific, technological ideas and having great knowledge of astronomy and maps to the highways to the stars. And we find the ancient history of China. It told of a period that where they had 18,000 years of peace until it was interrupted by extraterrestrial intervention, such as Enoch when he speaks of those who came down upon Mount Hermon and taught men to make swords and taught men to make war and women to paint their faces and the secrets of the stars and the secrets of the clouds. Now, were they teaching them how to make those here on the earth, cloud ships? We can only speculate. Now, is the answer to all of the problems on the earth? It tells us when all of these problems here on earth, they start to pile up on us here, we are told to look up, for our redemption draws nigh. In other words, redeemed, be taken back, draws nigh, and it comes from on high, as in Luke 12:32 said, it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom to the little flock. Now, one of the most amazing men of the Bible was Elijah. According to the Scriptures, he never saw death. And after his ascent into the universe, where did he go? He appeared nearly 1,000 years later with Moses and Elijah and Christ and the disciples. Did they take a trip together? Peter says so. We will see later on. It appears that this mysterious man had his own hotline into heaven, as it were. He healed the sick and raised the dead, and he caused fire to come out of heaven. It gives us 7 great historical accounts of all of these things. Now, we have to remember that also that he had a servant who came along behind him, and he performed 14 of almost identical miracles. So, why has this not continued on to our day? Have we fallen away? Have we lost touch? Is something wrong? Or is this all just ancient fables? Now, where did he learn this knowledge and get this power? Was it something that happened on one of these trips? Why did he not see death? Was he exposed to something that changed his molecular structure? If so, that would be the reason. It would be a curse to leave him here. After all he went through, he obeyed the Almighty. He took on all these false religions and false pious pontificating preachers of Baal. He destroyed them both. But later on, we find the same old card games back in town. He was replaced with other false preachers. Now, not all of them were evil, but we need more preachers like Custer needed more Indians. Now, where was this place in heaven or among the stars or this planet or this new earth in outer space? I believe that we will see that he was picked up like one of our jet set, like a helicopter flying him to an airport to make connections with a larger ship that would take him away to another country. Only in Elijah's case, the country is another earth or a sister planet. Here's a strange paragraph that we find in 1 Kings 9:5 and 6 from the Farrar Fenton translation, long overlooked and misunderstood. Then he laid down and slept under the broom tree. And he saw there a messenger touching him, and saying to him, Arise and eat. And when he looked, he saw his head, baked cakes, and a cruse of water, and he ate and drank, rested and slept. This paragraph and the following do not make sense in English as it's presented. Now, if you read this chapter and others, that you'll find that the KGB and the FBI and others after him would be the equivalent of who was chasing this poor fellow around. He was always on the run. Sometimes the records of the Scripture tells us that they were just hours or minutes. He was just hours or minutes ahead of his tormentors. So now, if an extraterrestrial messenger was cooking egg McMuffins close by, wouldn't that wake you up? I would think I'd have to be a light sleeper with my life on the line. Now, if an extraterrestrial, he actually fixed breakfast and he pokes the sleeper to wake him up, then the sleeper goes back to sleep, expecting the angel to wake him for lunch with deep-fried lamb ribs. This would be presumptuous. Now, but if an angel or an extraterrestrial messenger, if he woke me with breakfast, I'd be so goosey I couldn't sleep for a week. Now, after a scene like this, who cares about what kind of tree he was sleeping under? The translators used a mistranslation in the account of Jacob seeing the angel ascending and descending and claiming that he chose a 350-pound pillow to rest his head on. Now, the picking of stone pillows should make us suspicious, and you find the translators, they can't believe or translate properly. Well, we find the thundering herd here. They don't want us to comprehend it. They cover it up with the prophet having a dream or a vision, and we find that Jacob, in actuality, he was not asleep, but he was coming out of shock and not sleep. We find in our study on Gideon's encounter at this time that Gideon, that he cooked the lamb and baked the bread. Now, why the switch here? Why was it that Gideon's flight was a small computer flight with a stewardess to serve lunch? Remember, we said that before detectives solve mysteries, they're looking for a common denominator, something to connect the crime to the one man. In this case, we find many clues and many common denominators. As we said in the chapters on Gideon meeting the extraterrestrial messenger ship, we find the Strong's Concordance implies that the tree here was symbolic of a crest, like a heraldry and a family tree. In this case, another translation was, and Strong seems to go along with it, was an almond tree. A clue that is overlooked, is outside of the Bible, but it's a historical account of nations outside of Israel. One cannot read the different translations of Enoch and his trips to heaven, or the universe on various levels as he described it, with different extraterrestrial angels or messengers in charge of different levels or floors, so to speak. We notice that he speaks of different beautiful trees on each level, and we need not explain the word arise, as by now the reader or the listener has learned that is what the extraterrestrial ships do. Now, with great fear and trembling of offending the electronic puppets and the popes of hope, who will take away the libraries for putting this paragraph into modern English and see if it can make more sense. Now, this 1 Kings 19, 5 and 6 from the Farrar Fenton translation, let me read it again. He lay down and slept under the broom tree, and he saw there was a messenger touching him and saying to him, Arise and eat. And then he looked, and he saw at his head baked cakes and a cruse of water, and he ate and he drank, and he rested and slept. Now, my translation, according to evidence on verse 5 and 6, after Elijah recovered from shock, he climbed aboard this extraterrestrial craft with a squadron emblem of the house in which this extraterrestrial came, God's house or throne, as his counterpart John of Revelation calls it. Then the ship arose, and while in the flight on the first leg of his long journey, he was served food and drink on board while he was in flight. And then he loosened his seat belt probably, put his chair back, and he slept some more. By the way, King James called it a juniper tree, and Strong says wrong. They concur with Farrar Fenton, they called it a broom tree. And we know now that all myths and fables in most cases are long-lost truths which are distorted in what appears to be flights of fancy that some ancient dreamed up while on wacky tobacco. Halloween, we find, is kept on October 31st, which is the date that the biblical chronologists date the start of the great flood that destroyed the godless and the wicked of Noah's day. Are they getting us to worship and venerate those dead tax collectors and corrupt politicians? They have elevated them, I think, to the realm of God. But the word for rise in Hebrew was pronounced koom, K-O-O-M. See, it's a phonetic sound. Now, Strong's Concordance says that, among other things, it meant to lift up, as we would say today, lift off. It also meant rising, as in a helicopter rising up. Did they mistranslate karoom as one of the 4 different spellings of the same word? We believe that they spelled these phonetically to describe the sound at takeoff. Now, King James says cherubim instead of karoom. 2 Samuel 22:11 from the King James, it said, he rode upon a cherubim or karub, and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. We might add verse 14 where he says karub. For sound they switched to koom. Now verse 14, the Lord thundered from heaven or the sky, and the Most High uttered his voice. Verse 17, he sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of many waters. Out of many peoples. He's talking about racial streams of people. In other words, he chose me out of many peoples. Where did he take him? What was this place in outer space? Where is this main headquarters? 2 Samuel 22:17 of the King James. He brought me forth into a large place. Where was this place? We will try to show you where they all went by quoting the rest of verse 17. He delivered me because he delighted in me. Now we have King David in 2 Samuel 22:1-3 from the King James. Here's David's song of thanks for deliverance. And David spake unto the Lord, and the words of his song in the day that the Lord had delivered him out of the hand of all of his enemies, and out of the hand of Saul. And he said, the Lord is my rock. My rock. Another name, ancient name for the house, as we've shown in the past tapes. A rock. In other words, a planet, a great rock in heaven. And he goes on, he describes it as my fortress, my deliverer, he who comes from the rock. Verse 3, the God is my rock, and in him will I trust. He's my shield. You remember the ancients of the Egyptians and others, all through the dark ages of antiquity, men described these flying saucers as flying shields. He said, I trust. He is my shield. The horn. Now it goes to a horn. You see, like the horns on the altar, we find this mysterious word, horns, always on the altar. Another ancient name for the altar, the house, the Zion, the Jerusalem, the rock, the palace, the temple, the tabernacle, and on and on and on. The horn of my salvation. It's this horn. These horns, when this planet is lit up and is fired up and it comes down, he said it's the horn of my salvation. Now he describes it again. My high tower. Now you see, instead of using pillar, it's referred to as a tower. And he says, and he was speaking in the first person, he was speaking of himself. And he said, my refuge, my Savior. Now, I believe, like in the Greeks where they use the word satorius, means drawn to a place of safety. He goes on, my refuge, my Savior, thou savest me from violence. Throughout all ancient records, they called saucers flying shields and so forth. And we've learned from the ancient sages of India that they recopied again in 200 A.D. They used the word rocket. We believe that Bible translators, we said before, they dropped the E.T. of rocket, which caused people to misunderstand the rock that followed them in the desert, and they changed back and forth here, you see, to pillars and fortress and high tower. Let's try analyzing what David said and see if we can take a trip into outer space as he was describing something besides a warm, gushy, religious feeling down deep in his bones and bowels? Or was he telling us something of a highly advanced technological, scientific nature in which he was to experience and try to pass on to a dumb generation that would, like us in this scientific age, that hoping that there would be somebody at the end of the age that could comprehend it? Hopefully we are that generation. If one was to search the Scriptures and put aside our outdated, archaic, religious, man-made concepts, as I've had to do, and let truth interpret itself, we find in the record of the book, to our shock and surprise, we find that many of the men in the book that were chosen by the Creator had first-hand experiences at the very abode of the Almighty. Now here's a review of some of the names used by writers and what they had listed by the men of old, and distorted by translators and lost as language died out and new ones appeared. Here's some of those, as we prove, are the same, only described differently by authors and writers and witnesses. A great high mountain, a cave, an entrance inside this mountain, a mount, sometimes meaning a great space platform that travels to the house of the ever-living, which is called Bethel, called Luz, New Earth, New Jerusalem, the Garden of Eden, the third heaven, paradise, which means a garden, bright in the morning star, and on and on. Now, if you bear with us, you'll see that they're all the same. That's describing this altar of the Almighty. We're going to have to do a tape on that where the altar's turned upside down and it's pointing towards the earth, and it's talking about judgment brought from there. But all of this is described by different writers using the descriptive language and the popular analogy of their day. But let's go. So a lot of times we'll read one word back here thousands of years ago, and I don't know why in the world we get the idea that that name is going to survive through centuries and centuries. Well, not so, because we are changing names just within the period of my lifetime. I've seen many things that are called different by different names now, and when I use some of the old handles, so to speak, to the younger generation, they don't even know what I'm talking about. Let's go to King James apocryphal writings, which are now being accepted once again by some, let's say church groups. They keep a low profile until their fellows acknowledge their acceptance, as they don't like to be ridiculed. Now, these books are in the old King James Version and the Geneva Bible, not the ones that we're sending out, but I have an older one that does have the Apocrypha. Also accepted by, believe it or not, the great Christian reformer Luther, and our Pilgrims had it in their book. Now you decide. The Apocrypha fills in a lot of missing gaps and are proving very prophetic in our time. Maybe this is why they wanted to get rid of them, because, boy, I tell you, it described a lot of hell that was to come down on the people. And so there was enough bad news in the 66 book, and they didn't want to hear any more or whatever. Now, King James and 2nd Maccabees, 2nd chapter, verses 4 to 8, including the King James preface to the chapter. Now, I got to get the old magnifying glass out here. It goes on to say what Jeremy the prophet did, how he hid the tabernacle, the ark, and the altar, and what Nehemiah and Judas wrote, what Jason wrote in 5 books, and how those who were abridged by the author of this book. Now, this was written back in great antiquity, even before it went into the Bible. This is what they put in the preface. Now, starting with verse 4, it also contained in the same writings that the prophet, being warned of God, commanded the tabernacle and the ark to go with him as he went forth into the mountain where Moses climbed up and saw the heritage of God. All right, now see, that's where it's confused him. He went into the mountain. Then the mountain ascended. Like the old churchy songs, we shall mount up. A lot of times they call it a mountain, which means something up very high. So the translators, they didn't get it here, where it lifted off, mounted up. Let's go on. And when Jeremy came,
thither he found a hollow cave, where he laid the tabernacle and the ark and the altar of incense, and so stopped the door. This cave had a door on it. Verse 6, and some of those that followed him came to mark the way, but they couldn't find it. Verse 7, and when Jeremy perceived, he blamed them, saying, as for this place, it shall be unknown until the time that God gathers his people again together and receives them unto mercy. Then shall the Lord show them these things, and the glory of the Lord shall appear, and the cloud also. Now it switches from a mountain to a cloud. And it was showed under Moses, and when Solomon described the place that might be honorably sanctified. So in our other chapters we show and prove this wasn't talking about a mountain, and God's not going to come back and lead you stomping through the desert and show you where some tabernacle and an ark's hid out. So we find in the 4th verse that Jeremy went into the mountain where Moses climbed up, and we found in past chapters Moses climbed up into a ship of extraterrestrial origin, and he saw the heritage of the very household of the Almighty. Now in the 5th verse we find Jeremy, he came thither like Elijah. After he took the ark into the so-called cave, he stopped, or he closed the door. The 7th verse states that God would not know, or states that the people would not know where it was until the Almighty returns and gathers his people. The 8th verse gives us a clue. The Almighty appears in a cloud. See, like a 747 of clouds coming down to earth. But note also that it was showed under Moses. He will be shown the ark and the other stuff. Was not in a cave, but a chamber, a room in the great city of the mount of the Most High God. And there was another man who visited the same mount of the holy city that Elijah and Jeremiah visited. It was John of Revelation, chapter 11:19. And the temple of God was open in heaven. Now it switches from cloud, mount, and it's called a temple. And there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there was lightnings and voices and thunders and earthquakes and great hail. Now here John is describing the great mount descending. It sounds like thunder as he describes the noise. Now he explained what happened in the first of Elijah's trips in 1 Kings 19:5 and 6 from the Fenton. It goes on to say, and he laid down, slept under the broom tree, and he saw a messenger touch him, saying, arise and eat. And when he looked, he saw by his head there baked cakes, a cruse of water. He ate and drank, and he rested and he slept. So here we have verse 7 and 8 explaining the second phase. They're explaining the second phase of the trip in a larger ship to an unknown place in outer space. Let us try to solve this riddle where several men have gone. Now the key figures of scriptures, it was always there but never understood. So let's look for some of these keys. Now we go to verses 7 and 8, and it's talking, or we're quoting from the Farrar Fenton, I mean to say. The messenger of the ever-living, however, returned a second time, and touched him, and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he rose, he ate and drank, and he traveled upon that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of the ever-living. Now I believe that we explained before that Horeb meant a place in space, or in the vast wilderness, or the great sea of space. Now, I may be wrong here because I'm just guessing. We don't know how many hours it took to get there and back, and I think that I may be presumptuous in my guessing, for we have no idea once he reached his destination how long he stayed there. So I will skip that. So it goes on, he had not the power nor the strength. Or was he talking about a vehicle or an eagle to make the trip there? We see in the 7th verse that the eagle ship, it appeared to have landed in a larger space station, and the pilot or the extraterrestrial messenger, he goes back to Elijah's seat. he wakens him the second time, telling him the trip was too much for him. Now, as we've seen, the G-forces, they have the effect on them as their rockets pull into deep space. Now, you talk about jet lag. Now, verse 8 tells us that the larger ship arose. Then we find more confusing remarks as the captain of the ship tells him it'll take 40 days and nights to get there. But I believe that he was referring to a round trip, and the amount of time, as I said before, we can't be sure how long it took to get there and to get back, or exactly how much time he spent there. But they confuse us with the fact that Elijah has to eat a meal that's to last him for 40 days and 40 nights. What, was he in the cheap section instead of being in the VIP section? No, Elijah, he was a very special invited VIP guest, and the word food, as used by Farrar Fenton, was mistranslated to meat in the King James. Now, food also means fuel. According to Strong's Concordance, the word translated to meat had several meanings. Akiylah is pronounced Akilah. Was it referring to the engineering law of propulsion? Was it what propelled this extraterrestrial ship? Then he goes on to say Akilah could mean also something edible, food or meat, or it could have been a call, A-K-A-L, and it's pronounced akal, meaning to burn up and etc. Now, as the rockets used in liftoff, were they burning up fuel? Now, verse 8 also tells us it was to take 40 days and 40 nights of earth time to go to this Horeb, to this area where the mountain of the Almighty was. We've also used Strong's Concordance to prove Horeb and Sinai are talking about that place and where it is in space, and that they're one and the same, and it's called the Mount of God, not to be confused by earthly geographical locations on earth named after extraterrestrial places by earthmen after their great witness of extraterrestrial events and interventions and trips to these places. And also, back in antiquity, as we've shown, there have been those who rename places here on earth, just like the people going to the East Coast said New York and etc. and New Jersey after their homeland that they left in Europe. We understand then that after all of this great witness of events of extraterrestrial intervention, we understand this great Mount Horeb or Sinai was a great celestial yacht, so to speak, that was to transport them to the main headquarters. What I'm trying to say here, he started out possibly in an Eagle ship, a small shuttle ship that was taken to a main ship that would then continue on at a very high rate of speed to outer space, to the great space port. We will also equate the Mount ship as a large second home, like a 20th century motor home would travel in, a home away from home. Farrar Fenton, like others, they failed to understand that after they used the word Mount 19 times in one chapter, as I'm speaking of in Exodus, and they suddenly switched to mountain, and the mount is used to transport them to something high up or out, called a mountain by John of Revelations and many other descriptions. Now, mountain has a dual meaning, such as going up, loom up, shoot up, also so large that he compares it to a mountain, and also saying something very high up in outer space, so they have to equate it to the mindset of their time, something they knew about, such as a mountain. But the main point they miss is a new earth on different, or a different earth, or world, like St. John was acquainted with this. Now we cover this later, but now back to verse 9 of 1 Kings 19. And he went into a cave there and lodged in it, when the message of the ever-living came to him and asked, "What do you here, Elijah?" Now this is from the Fenton we're quoting. There's another point we would like to cover. Was the extraterrestrial pilot possibly trying to explain to Elijah that he would not be able in his own strength? Was he referring to, say, zero gravity, also given a diet supplement to compensate for the possible calcium loss caused by being in space for too much time? Now, modern astronomers have found out that they've suffered from the or modern astronauts, I mean to say, that they've suffered from the loss of calcium during extended time and space. Now verse 9 is describing, I believe, the small shuttle ships that are landing inside of the larger mount ship, ready for launching to the planet in outer space. This is what was called by John the New Earth, or heaven, or outer space, called the throne of God, New Jerusalem, and so forth. Now, prior to the second takeoff into outer space, verse 9 tells us that the angel or the messenger went in what is described as a cave, a large cave-type opening in the large ship. It does not say Elijah. As we go back and we read verses 7 and 8, the messenger pilot still in charge. Then if you read verse 9, he went into a cave and lodged his ship, or tied it up, or tied it down, as they would say at the airport. Now for the trip, as a wheel within a wheel of Ezekiel's chapter, he describes in it, and the message of the ever-living came to him, the captain or the angel of the ship, and asked him, "What do you hear, Elijah?" For our Fenton uses the word Eliah. Now King James says Elijah, but they're actually the same personage used with different spellings. Now if people don't believe this so far, then you've got to believe that Elijah was given a Vita-packed lunch and he ran for 40 days and 40 nights, and he didn't suffer any type of cardiac arrest or run out of breath, and he winds up in the desert and luckily finds a funky cave with no bears, and he tramples around in the old bat pucky. Now can you imagine Elijah wandering around in a snake-infested cave from chamber to chamber, hollering, "You who are you here, God?" Then God sends a messenger by telling him, "I'm not inside, but meet me on the top." God was up there getting some fresh air. See, if we go along with our old archaic ideas, how very stupid and inconceivable and incoherent it becomes. So we see that the pilot on the main bridge of this very large mount ship, he phones possibly on the intercom to the Almighty on the bridge of it, shall we say, or his quarters, or the captain's quarters. And we'll see Elijah then on the bridge. Elijah answers in verse 10, thinking that he's talking to the Almighty. He replied, "I have been very zealous for the ever-living God of might, for the children of Israel have forsaken their covenant, thrown down the altars, and have slain your preachers with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seeketh my life to take it." Verse 11, "But it was answered, Go out and station yourself upon the hill," or the mount, see, "and the presence of the ever-living, and see the ever-living pass," as he goes by in the larger ship. So I think possibly at this point we should ask you to go to tape 2 on the subject in case you lose any of your tapes. This is P.O. Box 1086, Lakeview, Missouri, 65737, and write Pilgrim Ships. We appreciate you listening. We would like to hear from you, and we thank you ahead of time. Turning to Lucifer's star. So as we continue on in verse 11, Elijah gets his answer to get out of the smaller ship and report up to the bridge so that he might observe the takeoff, which is described in great detail by Elijah, who can hear the Almighty in a normal tone of voice afterward. And I am guilty as the next in misquoting and misunderstanding the next few verses, not until going back and seeing it in the light of truth as to actually what really went on, using again the common denominator of several men's correspondence here in the scriptures of their experiences. Now in verse 11, after reading it over, you understand that Elijah was not standing on an earthly hill waving to the Almighty as he screams by, or standing on another earthly hill waving to the Almighty as he screams back from heaven. Now the last verse, it tells us, or tells him, to go to the hill or the bridge and watch the great ship as it passes from the earth's surface. The proof, before we go back to the takeoff of Elijah, let's check a previous takeoff witnessed by Moses and the people with him. Exodus 19 and 3, "And Moses went up unto the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, Thou shalt say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel. Now verse 4, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and I brought you unto myself. So, did not Elijah and the rest of the prophets, did they not fly to this so-called mountain, this house, this temple, tabernacle of the Almighty? Where is this mountain? We know that Big Bird didn't fly them there, so it was an extraterrestrial ship. Now Exodus 20 and 18 gives us a clue. He tells of the Almighty ship taking off, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, and when the people saw it they removed, and they stood afar off. Now where was this great mount flying off to? Where was its headquarters? Before we go to that, let's go back to Elijah, because there will be well-meaning religious people who say that we've got it wrong. And he goes on, and he replied, I have been very zealous for the ever-living God. Of might for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, and have thrown down your altars, and slain your preachers with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it. Here we find Elijah talking to the Almighty prior to the takeoff. The Almighty doesn't fly off in the middle of the conversation, but it appears in the interim here that the crew is ready for takeoff and warns Elijah to strap himself in. And then we'll take off, but the mistranslators, they goofed it up. They're not sure that Elijah was talking to the captain of the ship or the Almighty, a great extraterrestrial messenger pilot, possibly, or the Almighty, until verse 11. But it was answered, Go out and station yourself upon the hill in the presence of the ever-living, and see the ever-living pass. Did he go out to the bridge of the ship so that he could see out of the window and watch the takeoff? Now the ever-living pass, takeoff. Now, here's why he watched, and he describes what he saw, and he reported it back to us. He goes on to say, the rest of the 11th verse there, And there was a great and mighty wind tore the hills, and shivered in the crags before the ever-living. The ever-living was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, and the ever-living was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire, and the ever-living was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. So I think that the people here have misunderstood that this was a review of the mighty ship of the Almighty and the earthquaking after the ship taking off, as it fired what would we say, afterburners from the great blast off. Now the still small voice showing us he prefers love and gentleness to using force. In the Hebrew it appears that was Elijah was surprised that the ever-living spoke to him so calmly in his own earthly language, and he was able to comprehend every word, not wimpy as it appears. Now the King James stereotype we saw in another chapter, where the Roman soldier, he describes the earthquake as he saw the great ships taken off into outer space. Now I don't believe that we have got to that tape as of yet, but it's talking about the great ships at the resurrection. We go into great detail there. But what the Almighty was trying to get across to Elijah was, don't be amazed by what I do and my technology, but listen to my commandments and the truth that I teach you in a calm voice. Yes, the Almighty drives a flying saucer. Christ said, Pray thusly, Our Father which art in outer space, or heaven if you like. And we've learned but now that there's a lot of space traveling going on, and the Almighty himself seems to drop in quite often, or used to. Now, where's his headquarters located? No one's ever tried to tell us until now, or maybe we just weren't listening. Elijah doesn't go into what went on after they reached their destination. John and Ezekiel go into more detail about the place, and they describe it in detail, and all that we are told in a brief conversation prior to landing. We're told who to contact on his return. And I think that it appears that there's a lot left out by the translators. Now verses 15 and 16 mention two rulers of Israel, King Hazal, Hazal, that were over Aram and Jehu, king over Israel. And it goes on that speaks of Elisha ben Shah, Phat, of Abel Macholiah. And then he tells him to consecrate as preachers after you. So apparently Elijah knew that he was to return from this outer space world, and that he was not to be seen until 1,000 years later with Moses and Christ on the Mount. The question is, did the disciples take a trip to another planet? So it seems that Elijah had a lot of people to contact, because he came back and on a couple of different trips there. And he was to go see the kings and also a farmer who were to become new prophets and preachers and teachers. And it appears that this prophet, he had to contact a lot of people. Was Elijah to contact the 7,000 people the Almighty spoke of? He'd have a lot of people to contact, naturally, spread over a very large geographical area, especially if you're on foot, if indeed he was. And he had a short time to accomplish all of this because the Almighty, apparently, he told him here he had a pre-scheduled pickup launch, and you don't keep the Almighty waiting. And once again, we would remind you, as the Scripture says in our Scientist Day, talk about a launch window open in heaven. So everything was set on a timing. And I don't see why we should have trouble realizing that when he came back and he was told to see 7,000 people here, and a lot of them were listed by name. And we get into this in more detail in other tapes. But we find that if Jonah could be picked up and flown to a city, so naturally they witness his testimony. So this man went to see everything from kings to farmers. And when you go zooming in a shuttle ship of some type, you land, you get out and you say, I've got a message from the Almighty. Well, I believe that gives you pretty good credentials. Now let's see how Elijah contacted all these people. 1 Kings 19 and 19, we'll use the King James, and it's called Elisha Chosen. So he departed thence and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. Let's try to make some sense out of this. Elijah's not walking down a country road and sees this old farm boy sweating his tail off, trying to hold on to an old wooden plow and dry earth with some old oxen swatting flies, not really interested in whether the field gets plowed or not. Then a stranger comes by and he throws a sweaty mantle or a cloak over the poor fellow's head. The next verse, it tells us that this farm boy follows him. My reaction would not to be run after him, but to run away from him. Must have been a boomerang mantle, because it was cast on him as he passed by. So I think once again the translators did a real job on us, because later on in other chapters we show how this special mantle was left behind with Elisha, and he was able to part the waters and to walk over on dry land, or fly over to dry land, after we found out what walk means in many cases. Later on we see Elisha here. He follows Elijah to the ship after his final and last trip, and Elisha asks Elijah for twice the power that Elijah had. He raised the dead, called fire out of heaven, and you know the rest of that tune. And we see Elisha, his replacement here. He got his request, for he got the proof when we re-examine what really happened here that caused 3 kings and a farmer to believe in this bald-headed, bearded old vagabond. So it would appear. Now that's not a slur on Elijah, but that is how he's described in Scripture. Remember our chapter on Jonah and why the king of Nineveh and the people of that great city believed him after the buzz in the city and a great extraterrestrial saucer? That's what took place here, and why the kings and the farmer boy believed on him and his mission. Remember the word passed, as in overhead. This mantle was a ship. That was what passed over him. And he went home and he held a big neighborhood barbecue, and he cooked over his wooden plow and other farm instruments. He made a bonfire with them, and he cooked up his oxen and fed the neighborhood. And then he rose with Elijah and went with him. Now, unless we believe in magic cloaks or mantles, but you see how these things get distorted here, because I wonder if it was not the Catholic priests reading from this account out of the Bible when they talked about Veracocha and when he went back to heaven and took all his records with him, and he cast his cloak out over the sea, and he and his men stood on it and flew away. Somebody down through history has distorted all of the secular history, the heathen history, and they've distorted the Bible too. But anyway, so we don't believe in magic cloaks or mantles, and we define Elijah, if we went by that account, he'd have to be Mandrake the magician with a magic coat. But we know that's utterly ridiculous. Now, in 1 Kings and 20, he left the oxen and he ran after Elijah and said, "Let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee." And he said unto him, "Go back again, for what I have done to thee." Verse 21, he returned back from him. He took a yoke of oxen and he slew them, and he boiled their flesh with the instrument of the oxen and gave them unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. In other words, he talked with him. And when he arose as Elijah did, he went up with the messenger. Now from the Friar Fenton, we go back to Elijah, and that's for anybody that might be interested in this account. We're talking about took place in the year approximately 896 BC, and Elijah receives Elisha here, he receives Elijah's mantle. Then they were talking and conversing, and a chariot of fire stopped between them, and Elijah descended in a tempest to the heavens. In other words, like a tornado, something went around. You have all different renditions as you read through the different Bibles, but it says here, Elijah ascended in a tempest to the heavens. But Elisha looked on and shouted, my father, the chariot of Israel and his horses." And he never saw him again. He seized his robe, however. Now he's talking about his own personal robe, and he tore it in two, and the mantle that Elijah wore fell upon him. Then he returned, and he stood on the bank of the Jordan, and he took the mantle of Elijah, which had fallen off him, and he struck the waters and said, "Come, ever-living God, the God of Elijah, as if to myself." Then he struck the waters, and they divided on this side and on that, and Elisha crossed over. And the pupils of the preacher who were in Jericho to the south saw it, and remarked, "The spirit of Elijah has fallen on Elisha." So see, look here, it's talking about men far off. They saw this great event, so we know it wasn't a magic cloak. So they went to meet him and bowed him to the earth and said, "You see now your servants are 50 strong men. Let us go and seek Elijah, for the fear of the spirit of the ever-living should carry them away and drive him to some of the hills or to some of the vales." End of quote. So we know he tore his own robe up due to radiation, so that no man that would find it or come across would wear it and get radiation burns. Now this mantle that fell on Elisha, as they put it, erroneously here, it came down from the sky. It parted the water as the ships of the Most High parted the sea before the Egyptians, so Israel could cross over. Now verse 16, the 50 men apparently knew of Elijah's trip in the wind machines, mistranslated spirit. Note, verse 11 calls it a tempest, a type of wind, and the word mantle has 4 different meanings. The mantle that fell or came down from heaven. Strong's Concordance runs you all around. From one scripture is glory or glorious, and the men of old seeing God's mount or fiery chariots ascending or descending, they described them as having seen the glory of the Most High God. So that concludes our chapter, or tapes, shall we say, Return to the Lucifer Star, and I hope that you will get something out of it and look at once again at your Bible in a whole new light. I would like now to continue on with a chapter that I researched many months ago, entitled The People of the Dog Star Sirius. And I think that you're going to find that this ties in with history, with our Bible, and possibly gives an answer as to where, if not all of, some of the black people came from and where they get their information, might get some information from. Because Christ said, in the Father's house there are many mansions. Now, I've saved a lot of these talks till hopefully that some of the people that would get these different albums of tapes, I tried to start them off just as gentle and softly as I could, because some of this gets pretty hairy, as the young people say. And some of this material is very hard to write about, and it's impossible to talk about to most people. The most sensible people, I think, with their feet on the ground, they'll reject you walking away thinking you're a fool whose elevator doesn't go up all the way. And those who readily agree with you instantly, you don't want to be seen with them, as it might destroy what credibility that you do have. I try to understand my fellow man's confusion. As for the first 28 years of my life, the only thing that filled my head was lucky strikes, fast cars, and the opposite sex. But after discovering all of this was rather shallow, there had to be something more than just 70 allotted to man. Then one day it dawned on me that if the scientists were correct, and there were 200 billion stars just in our little universe, then there had to be other life out there. Why did the Creator build so many planets and just let them go to waste? Now, people use the word prejudiced incorrectly. Its meaning is to prejudge a matter or people without first examining the facts, or people before passing judgment, as in the case of this chapter, this tape, as to whether there's any validity to the evidence that we present. Why has it not come to light before now? This is not something that we dream up out of our head, but we tried to give documented evidence of it to give us some validity. Now, people ask, how long have you worked on this research or books or tapes? And they're all shocked when I tell them way over a quarter of a century. Well, why so long? It's like a doctor who's a so-called specialist, being knowledgeable about one part of the body but not understanding what relation it has to do with the rest of the body. So after reading a Pace book written by a very educated man, he spent years of his life studying Oriental history and admitting that it was years that before he realized that one civilization overlapped and borrowed history and science from one another, and we all lost our understanding due to the name and the language changes, such as our chapter that we're speaking of here on the doggone people. They were black people, and they had great astrological or astronomical and scientific knowledge of the planets that Western man, he's only learned about from these people in just say the last century. Now the Dagon claim that all of the seeds of life started out here with this star called Sirius by our present day astronomers. Quite possibly so in part. We've shown how Genesis made it quite clear that animal life and trees and plants and so forth were dispatched from outer space to our new planet after it cooled down and was able to sustain a transplanted life. Because once again, we remind you, go back and read it very carefully, where even I believe in old King James there, it talks about that it talks about the plants and the trees before they existed here on this earth. So if they existed somewhere else, they had to be brought here. Now, if I may play prophet for just a moment, which in time serious thinking people will prove me right or wrong. Now, if we were to trace the doggone people, there seems to be some evidence that the blacks of the doggone were brothers to Egyptians who spoke of the planet Sirius, which they also called it Dogon, and many other names which we're yet to discover. I believe that in a future book or tape, shall we say, will prove that all extraterrestrial colonies of ambassadors from the planet or the area of Sirius, that they also possibly they set up an embassy and were what we call Venus, the third planet. Now, was that the father of Cain, and was he there? The word Cain, Con, and in like canine for dog, was this where it came from, like dog star? I admit it's rather wild, but the woman that Christ called a dog in Matthew 15:26 and 27, and also Mark gives the account in the 7th chapter, verses 27 and 28. I believe that most all of Christendom would agree with me that Christ did not use this word dog in a slanderous or derogatory intent. Why did he address her as a dog? Christ referred to his followers as the sheep, the lost sheep of Israel, the people that were separated from the other nations because of the race law and so forth. We find all through the Old Testament that they were to be a segregated people. They were set apart, and Deuteronomy, I believe the 7th chapter, says you're a chosen people, a special people above all the people upon the face of the earth. He had these Adam people, these Semitic people, he had them set aside for a definite plan and purpose. And it doesn't mean that these other races and nations do not. But we're just talking about this. We're speaking of the history of the Semitic people who disobeyed the Almighty, had cut themselves off. He had divorced them. He didn't say anything about divorcing the Asiatics or the blacks or anybody else that I know of. Now, calling this black woman a dog, that'd be like calling her a nigger. And I don't think Christ would say something like that. Christ called this particular woman a dog. This puzzled me for over 20 years. I researched it as far as finding out that she was racially a non-Israelite. But now, Matthew 15 and 22 of the King James Bible starts out, and behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coasts, and etc. The proof that she was a non-Israelite is in verse 23. Christ answered her not a word as she asked him to heal her daughter. Even the disciples came and said to send her away. She follows after us. All of this was put in there for a type, a shadow. It was for a purpose for us to learn something by. When Christ did not answer her, he retorted, I am sent but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So we've missed the clue, the house, as in a family tree. Obviously, this woman was of a different race. Christ said, in the Father's house there are many mansions or places of abode. The Farrar Fenton edition of the Bible, it renders Matthew 15 and 26. It is not right, was his reply, to take the children's bread. In other words, see, this is an old idiom. We're talking about, well, let's use the religious vernacular, spiritual bread, knowledge. And he said, I'm not to throw this knowledge to the dogs. Now, in verse 27, this black woman, she says, most true, Master. She said, even the dogs feed upon the crumbs falling from their master's plate or table. Now, keep this word table in mind. Now, different translators don't seem to be able to agree as to who this woman was. Note the King James Bible refers to her as a woman of Canaan. Did it originally say that this doggone woman from the coast? Then Mark 7:26 gives us another clue, which has been caused because of what I deem as religious cover-up and has not been questioned. Now, this woman was identified by Mark as a Greek, as a citizen of Greece. But it says by nation, as Mark said, meaning nationality or origin. And it goes on that most of them say, but by nation or nationality, she was a Syrophoenician. So we look in our modern dictionary under the word Phoenician, it tells us that they spoke a Semitic language, possibly an Aramaic dialect. Now the Arabians, they had a lot of trade with Africa, and they dealt a lot in the slave market. Was she from the coast of Africa, brought from that coast, or to that coast from the interior of the Dogon people, which we now call the nation of Mali, M-A-L-I. Strong's Concordance lumps it all together as Syro-Phoenician, combining two words. In Webster's 7th Collegiate Dictionary, they only give the word Syrac. It equals Syracuse, Syrian, from Greek Syrakos, from Syrian, an ancient country in Asia, they say. Number one, a literary language based on an Eastern Aramaic dialect and used as the literary or liturgical language of several Eastern Christian churches. Number two, Aramaic spoken by Christian communities, which would have been after the time of Christ. We remember the Strong's Concordance said that the original word was altered or changed. We think the word meant woman of Canaan, is the clue as her being of Dogon. And so it appears that this woman might remain a mystery. Now Strong's Concordance puts in one of these little funny looking stars they call an obelisk by the word Syro-Phoenician, showing that they changed the original word. Some say it was off the coast of Africa, and when you go into there from the Ivory Coast deep into darkest Africa, you go into the Mali Republic as it's called today, and it could be identified because it's right next door. We've all heard the expression Timbuktu, and is located next to this nation, the closest area of Bandagaria, the home of the Dogon people. The nation of Mali was formerly called the French Sudan. We find that the mystery of these people can be traced back more than 5, possibly 6,000 years ago. A lot of this mystery was gained and unraveled by a couple of Frenchmen who spent approximately 7 years with these people, learning many of their ancient secrets and mysteries. And they were overwhelmed by their astronomical knowledge of the stars and their rotations and so forth. We've covered this. That was a couple of Frenchmen, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but Graulia and Dieterlen. They were two French anthropologists who lived with these people along with their priests and studied their habits, and after many years they gained their trust. And through their efforts the world was to learn and to start unraveling the mystery of the Dogon, or it's pronounced Dogon or Dagon. But anyway, while we are covering many of these word changes, if you were to look up the word table, there seems to be another doubt or contradiction crept in here. They are not sure which way the word table should be used. And we were subjected once again to the translator's point of view for this time and their theological interpretation. If I remember correctly, the word table is only used in the New Testament here about 3 times, and Strong's Concordance gives this explanation for table. Now you take your choice. They refer you to number 3979. Tabel is pronounced Pisa, P-E-Z-E, or I'm sorry, I mean to say, well, that's the way it's spelled. It's pronounced Pedazé, or Pedazé dot. It's feminine from a derivation, they say, from another word to refer you to, 4228, as advanced footwise by walking on foot. And as we have learned in other chapters, and we've proved that where it spoke that Christ, instead of walking on the water, he actually flew over the water instead of the mistranslation of walking on the water. Now, the first verses of Genesis, as we've cited before, they tell of the great Lord
who was flying over the waters, or the races of the different nations of people. And as he used the ancient idioms and if we were to go back and learn the etymology of the language, we understood that he was flying across it when he spoke of the faces of the waters. Now, this is a misunderstood idiom of the ancient language. Now, I want you to stay with us. It gets better. Here's the word 4228, P-O-U-Z, or P-O-U-S, and it's pronounced Puzi, a prime word, a foot, figure, or literally, or a footstool. So Christ said in Acts 7:49, the earth is my footstool. Now I think that we have covered it quite well in past chapters, where I have to confess quite a long time ago, when I started to study the mysteries of the pillar of cloud that followed them by day and a pillar of fire by night. It puzzled me greatly, but back there we went into it in quite lengthy detail, I believe, where Strong's Concordance literally described it as a table or a platform. And I think that we have proved in other chapters where it passed over at the Passover between the sun and the moon. And we also, I think that we have proved conclusively that in the days of Joshua, that once again this great table, space platform, or as we call it in the modern vernacular of today, at least I do, the great space station, intervened. And we find that many times that it has intervened into the lives of nations and men and great men of God, who the Almighty chose to hear their righteous prayers because they walked the chalk and kept His law, that this great space station intervened. And we find that as we go back and we study about Malcolm X, he was a spiritual leader, I believe back in the 50s, of the black Muslims. He told his people to be not of this world because he knew that they were not of this world, that they were from the stars. Now, the Dogon said that Digitaria revolved around Sirius every 50 years. The scientists have only recently discovered that this is true, and in the secret traditions of the Dogon, it refers to the star as the tiniest seed known to man. The botanical name is Digitaria. Now, the word 50 is also a clue. The cycle of every 50 years is used by the Greek writers and many others. That's as we have entitled our talks Pilgrim Ships, we find that the 50 oarsmen that are on board this celestial ship that comes with the captain called Jason, which is another Greek term referring to Jesus. But there's a great scientific allegory here too, I believe, that I will leave for somebody more scientific and who knows more about the stars than I do. But there's a great clue here in this hidden mystery of the cycles of 50, referring to a boat returning to this earth with 50 oarsmen. There's so much that we could tie together, but that could fill, I believe, volumes. Yes, there has been others who's wrote on the subject, but I do not believe that they've connected the two. Now, the men of the ancient, as contained in the Old Testament, and the women of the New, there's a couple other points that I personally think that I'm not preaching at this time, or that this is my personal gospel. Was Christ referring to the table and the bread, referring to Himself as the bread of life, the knowledge that was brought from the table or the platform in outer space or the third heaven, as St. Paul referred to? Note that this woman, when she spoke of the crumbs of healing, and that the knowledge that was trickle down, so to speak, to the other nations. Now, the translators, they misused the word table, because in Revelation 7:1, where it speaks of the four corners of the earth. So we find that the people of the Dark Ages thought that the earth was flat like a table, and we know that the Catholic Church and Christendom at large, they used this for many, many I guess, centuries to prove that the earth was flat, up until the time of Columbus and many others who was to leave Europe and to follow the curvature of the earth. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's examine some of the words that these little insignificant appearing words, as in Matthew 15:27 we've been talking about, where it speaks of the crumbs that falls from the master's table. If you look that up in your Strong's and the Concordance, you'll find the word means to fly or flown from. Now we check out the word master. Refers you to 2962 Kurios, and is pronounced Kurios. It means supremacy or authority, something that was flown here by a great authority, brought to this planet. Now as we go to another word very close to this Kurios, it's pronounced Kurios. From 2962, it means mastery, ruler's dominion. In other words, where he lives, where's his place of abode, his government, or the master and where he rules from, or the place referring and trying to give us a clue, if we'll only pay attention, as to where the seat of his government is. That John said that when he went to the holy city, the house, the temple, the tabernacle, the very residence, the throne of the Almighty. But I think that we've missed the ancient idiom of it as it referring to a table, because we find a lot of clues. We will not cover them all in this one talk, but where it speaks of the four watchers that Ezekiel and Zechariah saw, that they were to go to the four corners of the heaven and the four corners of the earth. As also we might check Revelation 7:1, also verses 3 and 4. Now listen very carefully. We have been really intimidated by especially the book of Revelations, and due to the misunderstanding and the lack of the knowledge of those that would teach on it, not understanding the chronological order, never looking at the scientific value of it, never bothering to look up the ancient idioms and also to correlate it back with the rest of the Bible so that they might understand it. But in Revelation 7:1, and after these things I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, and the wind should not blow on the earth, nor the sea, nor on any tree. Now, verse 2, and I saw another angel ascending from the east. The morning star rises in the east. Throughout Scripture it's called Luce. One place Lucifer. It's called the morning star, the day star, the evening star. Let me start again, verse 2, Revelation 7. And I saw another angel ascending, in other words, coming down from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it were given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, nor the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number thereof, and we won't go into all of that and what it means. But it shows where they're coming from. Now, once again, I would like to quote to you from the Revelations. We're just reading from the King James Version, the 8th chapter and the 3rd verse. And another angel came and stood at the altar. Now this, my friends, as we're going to prove later on in other chapters, people have totally misunderstood this, because I believe that the Almighty Himself allowed this air to creep in and to hide these secret facts that are to be revealed to you. Maybe you're among the 144,000 of your day. I don't know. Maybe you're chosen vessels. You're either chosen or nuts if you're listening to these tapes. I don't know what to say, because I'm glad I don't have to meet most people in person, because when you get into depths like this, it gives the average person mental indigestion, and a lot of you, I'm sure, that listen to it, this whole thing is so new to you, you may have to listen over several times to it to be able to follow it, get the gist of it. Well, what I'm trying to explain to you here, as I've found through the research of the ancients, that the change of wording here has become very confusing, because once again we find that this temple, this house of the Most High, and even Bullinger himself, one of the great men of over about a century ago, who taught on the astronomy of the Bible, showing that the heavens declared the handiwork of God, he spoke of the altar of judgment, and the day that would be turned upside down, be aiming towards the earth, symbolically shooting out fire. And so I maintain that Venus, the morning star, the house of God, is also called an altar. Now let me read this 8:3 again. Another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, and he should offer it with the prayers of all saints before the golden altar, which was before the throne. So you see, it's called a throne, it's called the temple, the tabernacle. So it appears that there's a great returning general, officer, archangel, cherubim, one of the great leaders, the great lords, one of the great Jehovahs, as we've explained it, which mean like the sons of God, but they've given the eternal deity that name, which I find degrading, but we can understand that because man has not understood it, and because of the confusion of our preachers. But here this is hard to follow at times, but he went back to the very altar, to the very house of the Most High. Now for those of you may be saying, so what difference does this make, and why are we bothering with all of this? I'll try to give you the best explanation I can. We know that Paul, as he spoke about the third heaven in the Scripture, talks about paradise and talks about the throne of God, and that he'll be King of kings and Lord of lords, and he speaks of those that'll reign and rule with him. And so where are you going to report into if you should be one of the fortunate ones to be above among those? And Paul says, I've run the good race and fought the good fight, and I know for a fact that there's a crown laid up for me. Now a crown, it represents rule and authority, and he wasn't speaking about one like in the Roman days where maybe you could make a little salad out of it at best. But he was talking about a permanent station. And he spoke of the prize of the high calling. Now, he said, in the Father's house there are many mansions. All right, now what about this footstool that I believe that this Syrophoenician woman was aware of? She had knowledge and understanding. Now let me go to Revelations, the 2nd chapter. Let's pin this down so you don't say that I took it out of content or context here just to prove my point. Let's see, Revelations 2:25. But that which you have already, hold fast until I come. At this time, I think I should ask you to please turn to the other side, and we will continue with Revelations 2:26.